My name is Johnathan Woodside, and this will be a Dharma talk, kind of a continuation of the last talk that I gave for Mindfulness Outreach Initiative, which was last month, the beginning of last month. So around the beginning of February, I was giving a talk on the 5 spiritual faculties. And at the time, I said I would continue with that list of 5. This is a little bit different. I'm not at MOI. I'm teaching remotely. And so there's a little bit of acclimating to things. So bear with me. So the 5 spiritual faculties consist of faith, or what I refer to as confidence, as the first spiritual faculty. So confidence or faith, energy, mindfulness, concentration, and wisdom. And so tonight I'm going to be talking primarily about this second faculty of energy. These spiritual faculties are sometimes called the controlling faculties. And when we cultivate these qualities, they support our practice. When we cultivate a sense of confidence in our practice, when we find a skillful effort, quality of skillful energy in our practice, when we are practicing right mindfulness, when the mind is focused, concentrated, attentive, and when we are growing in wisdom, these all support our practice leading towards liberation, leading towards greater and deeper insight into the nature of the world and our lives, into the nature of Dharma, understanding Dharma. So I know there is a chat feature with YouTube, so please feel free to use the chat if there are any questions. For those of you that are gathered at MOI, welcome. Happy to have you here. And for those who might be viewing online, grateful to have you with us. So energy is a really interesting spiritual faculty, I think, because for many people, it's a very, it's a challenging one to find the energy to support your practice. Sometimes it's also referred to as effort. One begets the other. When we make effort, it brings about an energy. And so one thing that I think is helpful is that if you feel like there is an imbalance in your energy, if you feel a lack of energy, there's ways of working with that. If you feel like there's an abundance of energy, maybe too much energy, there's ways of working with that. One of the Eightfold Paths is right effort, right energy. It's one of these spiritual faculties. The energy that we can find in our practice, the energy that is needed to support our practice. People who find it difficult to meditate when faced with one of the hindrances of sloth and torpor, when they feel a depletion of energy, this can be a very challenging aspect of practice. So I thought I would talk a little bit about this. One thing that can be helpful is to just consider your overall mindset, your overall attitude towards practice. Recognize if there's any opinions about yourself, any beliefs, any limiting beliefs about yourself in your practice when it comes to having energy or not having energy, or struggling with tiredness or sleepiness when it comes to your practice. Sometimes it can be helpful if we just kind of consider the possibility that those are just simply limiting beliefs. But yet, oftentimes we take the struggle that we find ourselves facing sometimes with our meditation practice of not having enough energy to support the practice, to sustain the practice, as somehow a some sort of character certainty about us as an individual. In other words, we begin to identify with the hindrance of sloth and topper. We begin to take a sense of who we are as a meditator. You know, we create a sense of identity about being a meditator, particularly a meditator that doesn't practice well because there is this issue of being tired all the time, of not having the stamina to sit for long periods of time. And so much of this is just a belief about what your meditation should look like and how you should be as a meditator. Uh, a lot of these are expectations that we place upon ourselves. And again, limiting beliefs that we've adopted at some point. And it may be that these views that we have about ourselves as a meditator are not they're not unbased. That they actually have something that we can point to say, well, look, here is why I believe this. I've been practicing for a number of years, and this is the primary challenge of my practice: is either having the energy to practice in the first place, or staying awake, staying alert in my practice when I am meditating. But are there times that you can call to mind when you have sat and been attentive, been alert? And I think that as you reflect upon this, you'll recognize that there are these times. The other thing, too, is to consider the context in which you set all of these ideas up for yourself. You know, in the context of being on a retreat, there is a real challenge to being on retreat. Sits within the retreat context are oftentimes a very much intensive practice, very much the kind of practice that maybe we aren't accustomed to outside of retreat environment. So when we are on retreat, we are encouraged, supported in ways that we aren't necessarily outside of retreat environment. So when we are on retreat, we can then begin to move into this kind of judgment of our practice based on, you know, this new discovery of practice where we're sitting for hours and hours throughout the day. An hour-long sit here, a short break there, and then back to sitting for another hour. And we find that challenging. And then we begin to judge ourselves for not being able to maintain the schedule the way we believe we should be able to. And again, we start to create these beliefs, and we might even carry those beliefs out of the retreat into our day-to-day life. And then we find ourselves trying to sit for an hour, and we're struggling. And we're thinking that, well, I should be able to do this. I did it when I was on retreat. Again, so we start to create this whole story around what we should and shouldn't be able to do. And all the while, we're really missing the practice because we're too caught up in identifying with a duration of how long we sit for. We're too caught up in identifying with, you know, being a meditator. And we're missing this wonderful opportunity to simply find the joy, the happiness, the presence in sitting, in just meditating, and just taking your seat, becoming still, practicing patience, and observing the mind. So I would like to encourage everyone to begin to not just take these beliefs that the mind proposes for granted, but to begin to test them, to begin to take these beliefs that you have about you as a meditator and put them in the crucible of your practice and really begin to investigate them, put them to the test, entertain the possibility that they are not true, but that the mindset that you might have might be reinforcing them. All of these negative thoughts of, I can't meditate, I can't sit for 30 minutes, I can't sit for 20 minutes, I can't sit for 15, or I'm not doing this right, my mind wanders, therefore I'm not good at meditation practice. These sort of things, they distract us from actually gaining insight. They distract us from really seeing that what's happening in the moment as we are directing the attention to observing the mind is that things change. We miss that fundamental meditative lesson that things are impermanent. When we can begin to practice seeing the impermanent nature, we can actually begin to see the changing nature of these thoughts, these beliefs, these expectations that we place upon ourselves. And when we can begin to see these stories in the mind as simply thoughts that arise and pass away, it starts to take the air out of that balloon. They begin to lose their import, their potency, their power over how we identify ourselves. We can begin to see these things as processes in the mind rather as some fixed and permanent state that is reliable for us to begin to construct a sense of who we are around. So that's one thing that you can begin to actively do to work with qualities like sloth and topper. How you can begin to cultivate a sense, a quality, begin to cultivate this spiritual faculty of energy is first begin to do an inventory. Look and see if you have these beliefs that you are somehow lacking energy. And that sloth and topper is this hindrance that always seems to get the best of you. So, kind of what I was getting at before when I was talking about retreat experience is, if we are moving into comparing mind, the mind that gets lost in making comparisons, one of the huge disadvantages that we can do to ourselves is compare ourselves to someone else. If you really find some strong pull of comparison, best to compare yourself with who you were yesterday rather than comparing yourself with someone else and their practice and what their practice looks like. And first off, we really don't know what anyone else's practice is like. We can't step into their mind and see their struggles. Simply because they're sitting still for an hour doesn't necessarily mean that that hour is somehow enlightened for them. It might be very challenging in the same way that we might be challenged when we sit for an hour. So notice that. Notice if the comparing mind is coming up. And, so far I haven't really talked about energy as a spiritual faculty. I've really just kind of begun to set the stage of how you can begin to kind of take an inventory of where you're at right now. So comparing mind can also be a big challenge when we are trying to cultivate a quality within ourselves. There can be, inspiration that we derive from others. We might see someone and feel inspired by their practice. But if we are moving into that sense of comparison and feeling, depleted If we are finding qualities like envy showing up in the mind, then that's not going to be helpful. And chances are we're not being inspired by someone per se, but that we're using someone to uh, place upon ourselves expectations of what we think meditation practice should look like. One thing that I will often tell my students is keep your eyes on your own paper. It's this simple instruction that we all probably heard when we were going through school. Keep your eyes on your own paper. Not that any of us were cheating, but eyes wander. And so, yeah, we might have heard this, keep your eyes on your own paper. And sometimes that can be a helpful little instruction that you can introduce to your practice when you notice the comparing mind coming up, when you can begin to see how the mind will not only create limiting stories about your own practice, but create stories about other people's practices. So energy as a spiritual faculty. Do you have energy to practice? Earlier, as I began to share this talk, I mentioned how effort begets energy. That's been my experience. That if I feel like there is a lack of energy, I've noticed that if I make effort, it tends to call up energy. One fundamental meditation instruction that you've all probably heard many times in any kind of guided practice is this instruction to begin again when you notice that your awareness isn't present. And what I mean by that is when the mind wanders and gets lost in some story, we lose that awareness. We're caught up in the story until the awareness returns. And when the awareness returns, that's a moment of awareness where we're now present again, where we are once again recognizing what's happening as it's happening. And we can begin to see what the mind is doing. Here's a story. And now I'm present again. I'm not lost in the story. I'm now once again observing there's a story. And so the encouragement there is when the awareness returns is to simply begin again. Direct the attention back to the present moment. Connecting again with your object of meditation. So this is a way in which we make effort. The awareness returns, and we make that effort to begin again, which is this effort where we are once again directing the attention to the object of our meditation. The object might be the sensation of the breath, the touch points, sound. It might just be presence. The object of your meditation might simply be being present. And so directing the attention back to the present moment. Making that effort brings about some energy that then supports that attention. And so we then connect to the present moment, connect to the object. Making that effort brings about some energy. The energy supports the sustaining of that connection to the object. If we're practicing Vipassana, being present with an ever-changing experience, being mindful of the next most predominant experience, then we can begin with each experience as it arises in the mind, being connecting and sustaining the connection with a sound, and then with a thought, and then with a sensation in the body, and so on, as experience changes from moment to moment. So, what is your experience of energy in your practice? Do you have an abundance of energy? I've talked about a depletion of energy. What is it like to have too much energy? Too much energy oftentimes it can manifest in the body, where we feel a vibrational potency of energy in the body. Sometimes this can really show up as even movement, fidgeting, sometimes even kind of a twitching. And it can be, this excess of energy can be disturbing to the practice. It's not supportive. It's, one way that we might think of it is how wind blows across the water and disturbs the water. And when you try to peer into the water, it's not clear because of the wind disturbing, creating all those massive ripples across the water. Sometimes too much energy can feel that way for us in our practice, not only physically in the body, but also in the mind. And sometimes we don't think of restlessness as a hindrance unless we're really attuned to experiencing it as a hindrance. We hear that restlessness is a hindrance to practice, but what's your experience of restlessness? Have you experienced restlessness in your practice as a hindrance? How have you worked with that abundance of energy? Sometimes it can just be in recognizing that the mind is a very busy place. That the mind is like a wild animal all over the place. That's an expression of this energy. So it can be felt in really profound ways in the body, a shaking, a trembling, and it can also be a very active quality in the mind. Many, many thoughts all coming at once. So if you've experienced that in your practice, that too can be a very challenging. And, it's interesting. Sometimes you might sit one day, you sit and you're struggling with sloth and torpor, a lack of energy. And then the very next day you sit again and now there's too much energy. And so we really kind of need to be strategic in how we're investigating this. It may be as simple as recognizing what you had to eat. Did you eat something really heavy? Did you eat something really, with a lot of sugar or a lot of caffeine? And I think that if you've been practicing for a while, you know firsthand that your first line to address the hindrances is mindfulness. That if there is a tired, lethargic quality in the mind, we can be mindful of it. If there is an anxious, restless quality in the mind, we can be mindful of that. It doesn't have to be a hindrance per se. It can be something that is onward leading for our practice. If we make it the object of our meditation and begin to investigate it, we will find the same universal characteristics in sloth and torpor that we would find in restlessness and worry, that we would find in a balanced energy. All of these things are changing from moment to moment. And that's really the thing. The spiritual faculties, wonderful as they also need to be balanced. Mindfulness has its own unique quality, but the spiritual faculties of faith, energy, concentration, and wisdom, they all have this potential for being out of balance in a way. Energy can be out of balance. With wisdom, there's quality of discernment. we want to have these qualities working together. Sometimes the spiritual faculties, it's not so much that they can be out of balance, but there's a way of working with them that it really is important to recognize that they can come about sequentially, and they can also work together to have a balancing effect on one another. So maybe as we go on and as I offer these further talks on the spiritual faculties, I can talk a little bit more about how certain qualities can become unbalanced. But effort and energy is kind of one of these areas where we can see very clearly that it can be an imbalance. And so we're practicing to bring about a right effort, a balance of energy. Too much effort turns into striving. Too little effort doesn't get us very far. So I'm going to just read a quote. And this is from a teacher named Sarah Doring. And this is on the spiritual faculty of effort. When effort is balanced without any strain, there's no sense of, I should do this. Rather, there's just a willingness to do. Out of that willingness, there comes a more and more constant flow of energy. This quality of energy is bold and courageous. There's a Pali word that describes it as the state of the heroic ones. And so you've maybe heard me talk about heroic effort. Sometimes that is what is needed to have the courage to be with this mind. And she goes on to say, it gives patience and perseverance in the face of difficulty. If pain arises, the heat of the energy burns away fear and makes it possible to do what ordinarily is very difficult to do, to go right to the center of the pain. So this is such an interesting quote from her, because to me, there's just a lot here. There's a lot to exploring in your own practice, exploring in your own experience, how you can begin to find balanced effort, a balanced quality of energy in your practice. And then also it hints to what is really possible for us. That we marvel at those that can sit for long periods of time without moving. Because in our own experience, we know there's difficulty there. And yet, maybe in our own practice, we've begun to push the boundaries and kind of explore these areas where at one point there was a lot of difficulty, a lot of discomfort in the body. And maybe that prevented further practice. But then as we continue to practice, we find ourselves meeting those points of discomfort, sitting for 30 minutes. And then we persevere and we sit for 45 minutes. So again, I'll share this again. The quality of energy is bold and courageous. The state of the heroic ones. It gives patience and perseverance in the face of difficulty. If pain arises, the heat of the energy burns away fear and makes it possible to do what ordinarily is very difficult to do, to go right to the center of the pain. I particularly like that last part, to go right to the center of the pain. How many of you have done that with your practice? There's a great many people that have, I'm told, become enlightened simply by observing pain. And of course, we need to take care. We need to show ourselves compassion. If you're experiencing difficulty, that's an opportunity for practice. If you're experiencing pain, maybe you show yourself compassion and adjust. It's up to you. It's a matter of your practice and where you're at. But you will find that there are times where you begin to go right to the center of pain. And when you direct this quality of mindful attention, when it is supported by energy, you move beyond the fear and you go right to the pain. And in observing the pain, you don't observe the pain. What you actually observe is the sensation. Pain is part of the story. You observe the sensation, and the sensation may be unpleasant and very intense, very gross, very sharp, whatever it might be, whatever characteristics it has. You go right to the center of that sensation, right to the center of pain, and you begin to observe it with mindfulness, and you see those universal characteristics. And I've talked many times about this, that in that intimate relationship with that sensation, that pain, things get really interesting. Let's put it that way. And so everything supports this. These 5 spiritual faculties, these are kind of foundational. We have these qualities, innate qualities within us, innate subtle qualities of faith, energy, mindfulness, concentration, and wisdom. And the practice helps us cultivate and really strengthen these qualities so that we can go further. Be inspired to go further in your practice, in your experience, in your exploration of the mind. So, Sayadaw and Tejaniya, there's a quote from Sayadaw and Tejaniya. When your understanding of the true nature of things grows, your values in life will change. When your values change, your priorities change as well. Through such understanding, you will naturally practice more, and this will help you do well in life. So when you begin to reflect upon these 5 spiritual faculties, when you begin to reflect particularly upon the quality of energy in your practice, what is the context? When you begin to investigate energy, the abundance or the lack of, the balance, in what context is that investigation? Do you see it as what makes it a spiritual faculty? What makes it a controlling faculty? Your exploration of energy in your practice, does it lead to naturally wanting to practice more? As a wholesome desire. As a spiritual faculty, does it help you do well in life? This is great fun, this practice, practicing the Dharma, investigating the mind. Some of you have had difficulty with energy. Some of you, maybe you've always had a content quality of energy in your practice, a very balanced, easygoing feeling of being supported by this energy. There is the application of the attention and the sustaining of that attention kind of comes very easy because the energy is balanced. There's a whole spectrum on which we can practice with this energy. There's ways we can work with it in a very kind of obvious way. As I mentioned before, maybe it's connected to um, your diet. Maybe it's connected to the activities you do over the course of the day before you actually meditate. And there's really subtle ways that we can work with energy. When we practice being mindful of the breath, we'll notice that with an inhale, there's a subtle calling up of energy, very subtle. And with an exhale, there's a releasing of energy, a bringing about of energy, and an easing of energy. And so we can practice in very simple, subtle ways with, energy. We don't have to make big moves. We don't have to necessarily force energy to be a particular way. Really, it's just simply being mindful and noticing how the energy is and letting go of ideas that energy has to be a particular way in order for there to be insight. Ideally, we want to have right effort. We want to have right energy. We want to have this energy expressed in a way that is skillful, right effort. So we can make right effort, but then however the energy shows up in our practice, we can gain insight when there is maybe not so much energy. We can gain insight into the nature of that, what it's like. We can gain insight into a lot of energy and what it's like when there's so much energy that we don't know what to do with it. And all of this kind of leads into these other spiritual faculties of how we can begin to explore them as well. For me, when I'm practicing, energy is one of these things that, for the most part, seems to be balanced for me. But there's inevitable times where if I'm not aware, not paying close attention, where I'll succumb to a laziness and I won't make effort. And there will be times where I'm making too much effort. And so, what does that look like for you in your practice? For me, what it looks like when I'm making too much effort is there's a rigidity that begins to show up in the body. There's a tightness and a tension. So a lot of times when I'm talking about too much energy, there's a striving. There's a striving in the effort. There's a controlling tendency. When there's so much energy, the effort gets really pronounced, really intense. When there's not a lot of energy, less effort. Less effort is made. It's like suddenly the gas tank is near empty. And so whenever I begin to notice this imbalance in my energy, I start looking at how is the effort? Am I making effort? Am I not making effort? These two things are so closely related. They are different. There is right effort, and there's this quality of energy, vigor. What is your life like? What is your energy like? There's so many different ways of kind of considering all of this. One thing that I've noticed is that when my energy is really chaotic, really just a lot intense, like this kind of buzzing, it affects those around me. And when my energy is more mellow, kind of a flow, then there's a calming effect for myself and others. Have you ever noticed people who are very, where their energy is really high? And if they have pets, you notice their pets are very much active, very wild, very crazy. And then the opposite end of that, people who are very mellow, their pets tend to be very mellow. So I don't necessarily mean energy in a new agey way. What I'm talking about is more just like your energy. You know, the movements of the body, are they fluid or are they jerky and quick? As you breathe, is there a fluidness to the breath, or is the breath really sitting high up in the chest and very shallow and rapid and quick? Or is there's this smoothness, or is maybe the breath really deep in the body? And so I think all of these are kind of expressions of where your energy is at. And so these sort of things, they become clear to us as we start growing in awareness, self-awareness, self-reflection. Any comments or questions? I've pretty much shared everything that I think I want to share tonight regarding energy. So this is a little new for me to be teaching remotely. Normally I'm with everyone there at MOI, so this is a new experience for me. And I think as I grow more kind of comfortable with it, familiar with it, there will be a greater tendency for me to kind of share more. But I think tonight this is really all I've got to say about this spiritual faculty of energy. This was very much just kind of what was coming up for me, what was kind of what I was noticing just for myself and in my own practice. And again, I really kind of use these qualities interchangeably. They are distinctly different, effort and energy, but they also kind of can be something that they work together. And I know that there is a bit of a delay with how things are showing up streamed on YouTube. So I asked if there were any comments or questions. So it's we'll just see what shows up. It's interesting, this delay. So if there aren't any questions, what we'll do, I think, is we'll just we'll take some time here at the end to practice together. I think after I end the talk, I will probably think of more things I would like to share with you about the quality of energy in our practice. But for right now, just understand that it's easy to try too hard. And we need to be skillful with this effort, this energy. And I think one of the more helpful things that I've realized in my own practice is just this relationship of when I make effort, it brings about some energy. And we find that every time we begin again. We make that effort to be present, and it can bring about some energy that supports the practice to be attentive, present. Yes, I can see your comments in the YouTube chat. And I see that there are no questions. Okay. All right. I don't know how well this is going to translate uh, through the streaming services um, that we've got here, but I'm going to go ahead and use the bell, and we'll take some time to meditate together. And I'll go ahead and do this as a guided practice. Right. So this will just be a short sit, and so 10 minutes. Oftentimes when I'm doing a guided practice, I'll just begin with reminding that there's nothing to do, nothing to make happen. And yet we make effort. Sometimes the effort is just simply having arrived, the effort to be present. And in being present, we simply observe. And so there's nothing to do per se. We're just observing how it is, being attentive to this moment. And so as we direct the attention to being present in this moment with whatever experience is taking place for you, there be just a peripheral awareness that checks in and notices what's the energy like? Does the energy feel balanced? Is there an abundance, maybe too much energy or too little? Notice what it's like if I give you the instruction to simply listen, be mindful of sound. And just in the listening, just in sound being known, what's the energy like now? Now, directing the attention to the sensation of the breath. This familiar instruction, placing the attention on the sensation of the breath, sustaining the connection. How's the energy? And letting go of all instructions now, and self-reflecting, taking an inventory with the instruction to simply be and nothing to do, nothing to make happen. What was the energy like? And how is that compared to the energy when there was just simply listening? And then the quality of energy as you directed the attention to the sensation of the breath. Where was it challenging, this balance of energy? Where did it come more naturally, this balance of energy? Where it came more naturally, can you learn from that? And what can you learn and share with the areas there it was more challenging to have this balanced energy? Was it all the same, simply shifting the attention from one object to the next? And just now, sitting, being, is there an effort being made? Maybe the effort is in letting go of the habitual doing that we do, the letting be, as you really discover for yourself what it means to just be. Nothing to do, nothing to make happen. Setting aside what we always do to simply be. There can be a sense of ease and calm, a content quality. Can you find for yourself a sense of ease in simply being here now? There's no great mystery to energy. With the eyes closed, taking in a deep breath and exhaling, and gently opening the eyes. Well, everyone, thank you all. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. Thank you for all those who came and were with us in person. And thank you for those who joined us online. And yeah, we've got a lot to learn about the technical side of things, but I think we're doing all right. We are making headway. So I'm going to wish everyone a great night. I wish you all well. Thank you all so much for being with us. Thank you for being a part of our Sangha. And we look forward to practicing with you again soon. Thank you all so much. Have a wonderful evening. Have a good night.